This was me 3 days ago, when my children kicked me out of the car and left me lying on the muddy roadside. But let me tell you how I got there, and what I did afterwards. Before I tell this story, I want you to leave me a comment telling me where you're from, miss. It thrills me and fills me with love and joy when I see how far my stories reach. The cold water was the first warning, not a timid drop but a sudden and violent downpour that exploded against the windshield of the black BMW, so new it still smelled of virgin leather and ambition. I was in the back seat, like a queen or like cargo depending on the lens through which you looked. My children, my two pieces of soul, were in front. David driving with that rigidity in his shoulders that he always had when lying, and Laura, my girl, staring fixedly at her reflection in the window, fogging it with her anxious breath. "It's going to be a great investment, Mom. You'll see," David said, his knuckles whitening around the leather steering wheel. "This residential project is foolproof. A unique opportunity." His voice sounded metallic, as if he had rehearsed it. I looked at my hands, those hands that once cradled his sweaty little head when he had a fever. Now they were full of bluish veins and age spots, clutching the worn canvas bag that rested on my lap. Inside, I only carried my documents, an old photo, and my cell phone. Always the cell phone. "Foolproof?" I asked, and my voice sounded weaker than I would have liked, drowned by the hum of the engine and the growing drumming of the rain. "David, you yourself said the market was unstable, that it was better to wait." "That was before," Laura snapped, turning toward me. Her eyes, so similar to her father's, flashed with an impatience that took my breath away. "Things change, Mother. You have to understand it. You can't cling to the past. It's for your own good. For our good." Mother. I was no longer Mom. I was Mother, a cold, distant title, like that of a contract that needs to be closed. The car smelled of her expensive perfume, David's cologne, new rain, and a lie so dense it could almost be felt. "My good," I murmured, looking out the window. We were already far from the city, on a secondary road flanked by bare fields and the occasional skeletal tree that twisted under the leaden sky. "And where exactly are we going? The notary doesn't have his office in the middle of nowhere, right?" A heavy, uncomfortable silence settled in the car. Only the hypnotic swish-swish of the windshield wipers marked the beat of my growing unease. "He's a partner," David improvised. "He has a property around here. He prefers to handle delicate matters in private, away from prying eyes." Delicate matters, my money, the savings of a lifetime, the fruit of selling the jewelry store after his father died. The capital, as David called it now. That should be optimized and reinvested instead of rotting in an account, waiting for an old woman to spend it on medicines and heating. "I see," I said, and I noticed how my fingers closed more tightly around the cell phone, inside my bag. It was an instinctive gesture, a small tablet of security. "David, Laura, are you sure about this?" "My God, Mom. Not again." Laura threw her hands in the air in a gesture of dramatic exasperation. "Always the same. You distrust everything, everyone. Do you think we want to rob you? That we're taking you to some wasteland to abandon you?" The word, said with so much sarcasm, hung in the air, poisoning it. David shot her a quick look. A flash of panic. She bit her lip, as if realizing she had let slip a script that wasn't hers. "I didn't say that," I whispered, but a cold stab of terror began to climb up my spine. "I'm just asking." "Well, stop doing it," David cut in, his voice harsh. "Trust us. For once in your life, trust." The car turned abruptly onto a dirt road, barely a scar in the landscape, that led into a wooded area. The branches of the trees, bare and twisted, scratched the roof and sides of the car like skeletal fingers. The rain eased a little, filtered by the blackness of the foliage, but the sound was even more oppressive. The tapping on the metal roof, the crunch of gravel under the wheels, the beating of my own heart, which was beginning to accelerate dangerously. "Here?" I asked, unable to hide my fear. "Does the partner live here?" "We're going to wait for him," David said dryly. He braked hard in a muddy clearing. The engine turned off, and suddenly, the silence was absolute, broken only by the rain drumming on us, trapping us in our bubble of poorly disguised tensions. David turned the key. The hum of the engine ceased, and the silence that replaced it was 10 times louder. Only the rain, A constant, gray drumming on the metal roof enveloped us. He didn't move. Neither did Laura. I breathed deeply. The air inside the car was stale, charged with the smell of their nervousness, and my fear. Well, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. Where is this gentleman? I don't see any property. David turned around. Slowly, his face illuminated by the grayish light filtering through the windshield, was no longer my son's. It was a mask of cold determination. The eyes that once looked at me with pure adoration were now empty, calculating. No one is coming, Mom, he said. His voice was flat, emotionless. A simple fact. The world stopped. The drumming of the rain became a distant buzz. I looked at him, searching in his eyes for a glimpse of a joke, of that absurd humor he sometimes had as a child. There was nothing. What? I managed to articulate. It was barely a whisper. That no one is coming, Laura repeated. Her voice was higher, tense like a violin string about to break. She wasn't looking at me. She was observing her impeccable nails, as if they suddenly interested her more than the fact that her mother was drowning in a sea of confusion. This is what there is. I don't understand, I said. And I noticed how an involuntary tremor ran through my hands. The notary? The investment? There's no damn investment. David exploded, hitting the steering wheel with the palm of his hand. The blow made me jump. It's your money, Mom. The money, always the damn money. Why can't you just give it to us? Why put so many obstacles? Wills, usufructs, conditions, we're your children. It's to protect you, I stammered, feeling how tears began to cloud my vision. So you don't waste it, to control us. Laura screamed, finally turning toward me. Her beautiful eyes were bloodshot, full of a hatred I didn't understand. Always controlling. What we eat, what we wear, who we go out with, how we spend our money, it's ours. Dad left it for us. Your father left it for me, I replied, with a strength I didn't know I still had. For me to live, so I wouldn't be a burden to you. And I've added to that every cent I've earned working. Well, you can't anymore. David spat. You're old, Mom. Confused. You take pills for blood pressure. You forget appointments. You're not capable of managing a fortune like that. We'll do it for you. And that's why you brought me here? I asked, and my voice broke. Reality, brutal, was beginning to make its way through my stupor. To what? David opened his door. The sound of the rain intensified, a cold and wet roar. He got out and opened my door. The wind lashed my face, mixed with the freezing rain. Get out, he ordered. No, I whispered, clinging to the seat. David, please, what are you doing? I said get out, he roared, and his hand, the same one I used to kiss when he hurt himself playing, closed tightly around my arm. His grip was iron, painful. David? No, I screamed, but I was weak, a frail old woman against her son's brute force. For God's sake, Laura. I looked at my daughter, pleading. She had her gaze fixed on the front seat, biting her lip so hard I saw a drop of blood gleam. She did nothing. She said nothing. Laura, daughter, please, I cried. David pulled me. It wasn't a gentle push, it was a violent, brutal shake. I lost my balance and fell backward. Out of the car, my feet got tangled in the threshold, and the world spun. The impact against the ground was dry, brutal. The mud, cold and thick, cushioned the fall, but I felt a sharp pain in my hip, a dull blow to my head. I gasped, breathless, my vision clouded by water and tears. The mud covered my hands, clothes, face. It tasted of earth, of humidity, of betrayal. The papers, I heard David say. Give me the bag. No, I screamed, clinging to it with what little strength I had left. It was all I had, my identity, my past, my little phone, my only lifeline in that sea of mud and desperation. He pounced on me. He wasn't my son. He was an animal, a stranger possessed by greed. He put a knee on my chest, making me expel what little air I had left, and tore the bag from my hands. He opened it with a jerk, took out my wallet with my documents, the envelope with the inheritance papers that obsessed him so much. This is what matters, he shouted, standing up. Not you, you were never more than an obstacle. He threw my empty bag, except for the phone he miraculously didn't see, into a nearby puddle. He looked down at me with contempt, with disgust. Here you rot, he spat. Then he turned, got back in the car, and slammed the door. Through the glass fogged by rain, I saw Laura's profile, rigid, looking straight ahead. She didn't look at me. Not once. The engine started with a roar. The taillights came on, two red demons in the gray twilight. The car began to move. The wheels spun in the mud, splashing me with more muck, and then they caught. It moved away down the dirt road. Each meter it traveled was a stab in my soul. I followed it with my gaze, incredulous, until the trees swallowed it and the sound of the engine dissipated, drowned by the relentless drumming of the rain. It disappeared. And then, only then, the true silence, that of absolute solitude. I lay there in the mud, shivering, gasping. The rain soaked me, seeped through the collar of my coat, froze my skin. The pain in my hip was a dull, hot throb, but it was nothing compared to the pain tearing at my chest. A void so immense, so absolute, that I thought the earth would swallow me right there. My children. My own children. Reality was a knife twisting in my entrails. They had abandoned me, like an old useless dog, like garbage. All for money, for some papers, for a future in which I clearly didn't fit. A sob escaped my throat, a hoarse and animal sound that mixed with the noise of the rain. I cried. I cried for the betrayal. I cried for the love I thought I had, and that turned out to be an illusion. I cried for the little children they once were, the ones who climbed into my bed when it thundered, who hugged me with that pure and selfless strength. Where were those children? At what moment had they become these monsters of coldness and ambition? The rain didn't stop. It was beginning to numb me. I knew I couldn't stay there, that I would die of hypothermia, alone, in that mud hole, and maybe that's what they wanted. Maybe that's what they expected. But something ignited inside me. A spark, small, flickering, under tons of pain and desperation. It wasn't rage yet. It was instinct. Pure and simple survival instinct. The cell phone. The idea emerged like a lighthouse in the darkness. David had taken the papers, but he hadn't seen the phone. It was in the bag. I had felt it against my chest when we struggled. With superhuman effort, I crawled. The mud yielded, trying to hold me, suck me down. Every movement was agony. My hip protested with fire. I advanced centimeter by centimeter, gasping, with rain lashing my face. My vision blurred, but I didn't give up. No, they weren't going to get away with it. I reached the bag, half submerged in a puddle of brown water. I put my trembling hand in, feeling inside, my numb fingers searching for the familiar rectangular shape. There. I grabbed it. I pulled it out. The screen was wet, but intact. I turned it on. The battery was low. 15%. But it was enough. It was hope. My fingers, cold and clumsy, slipped on the wet screen. I didn't dial 911. I didn't dial a friend if I had any left that they hadn't driven away. I dialed a number that wasn't saved under a name, but under a symbol, a small diamond. I had saved it that way years ago. For discretion, for the promise to use it only in case of absolute, total, desperate need. The line rang. Once, twice. The tone sounded absurdly normal, mundane in the middle of that hell. I prayed, please, please, answer. On the third ring it connected. There was no hello, no speak, just an expectant, professional silence. And then, I lying in the mud, abandoned by my own blood, with my voice broken by crying and cold, said the words I never thought I'd say. This is the Diamond Lady. Code shipwreck. My location is active. Come. I hung up. There was nothing more to say. The call didn't last even 10 seconds. I let the phone fall on my chest. Exhausted, the rain kept falling. The cold kept penetrating my bones. The pain was still there. But I was no longer alone. I was no longer defenseless. I closed my eyes, clinging to that small spark of hope, and I waited. I waited knowing that the person coming wasn't family, wasn't love. It was something different, something I had paid for long, long ago, like insurance against the day the world turned its back on me. and while I lay there, in the mud, it began to snow. Fine flakes that mixed with the rain, covering the muck with a deceptive layer of purity. It was beautiful and merciless at the same time. The perfect contrast between the coldness of the world and the last ember of warmth I had left inside, that faint fire of dignity that refused to be extinguished. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours. I lay in a limbo of physical pain and an emotional void so deep that the cold was almost a relief, a tangible sensation that nullified any other thought. Each beat of my heart was a hammer blow to my temple. Each breath of cold air burned my lungs. The snow slowly accumulated on me, an icy blanket that threatened to turn me into another sculpture in that desolate landscape. I thought of Manuel, my husband, of his smile, of his calloused hands that knew how to fix anything, from a broken toy to an aching heart. "You're strong, Isabel," he always told me. "Stronger than you think." Where was that strength now? Crushed under the weight of the most brutal disappointment. He adored them. He would have given his life for David and Laura. What would he have thought, seeing what they had done? The man who worked himself to exhaustion to leave them a secure future. A spasm of coughing shook me, a harsh and lonely sound that was lost in the vastness of the place. I no longer cried. The tears had frozen on my cheeks, mixed with mud and snowflakes. Only an icy resignation remained, the acceptance that perhaps my story would end here, in this anonymous mudhole, betrayed by the only thing I believed unbreakable. But then, a sound. Distant at first, barely a vibration in the ground that I felt through the mud. A low, constant hum that grew in intensity. It wasn't the engine of a normal car. It was more powerful, more determined. I opened my eyes, with effort. The snow clouded my sight. The sound became louder, closer. A muffled roar that cut through the silent murmur of the snowfall, and then some lights. Not the yellow, diffuse lights of a car, but two white, intense beams, like predator eyes, that pierced the curtain of white flakes. The vehicle stopped a few meters from me. It wasn't David's BMW, it was a black van, large, imposing, with windows tinted and impenetrable dark. It seemed to emerge from nowhere, a specter of metal and purpose. The engine turned off. Silence returned, but now it was different. It was charged with expectation. The driver's door opened. A black rubber button, a soft metallic squeak, a boot, heavy, practical, settled in the mud. Then another. The man who got out wasn't particularly tall, but broad-shouldered, compact, as if carved from a block of rock. He wore a simple black jacket and dark work pants. His face was severe, marked by a life of hard decisions, with several days' beard that framed a firm mouth. But his eyes were what made me hold my breath. They were light gray, like the sky before a storm, and at that moment, as they scanned me and the scene with analytical and professional calm, they showed not a trace of surprise, pity, or horror, only a cold and quick evaluation. It was him, my bodyguard, the answer to my call. The person to whom, in a luxurious and distant past, I paid a fortune for a service I never thought I'd need. Insurance against the world. Insurance against the day when everything else failed. He walked toward me with firm and measured steps, without haste but without wasting a second. The mud crunched under his boots. He knelt beside me, not caring about the muck that soaked his pants. His proximity wasn't threatening, it was solid, real, an anchor in my sea of disorientation. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was deep, hoarse, like stones clashing underwater. He didn't ask what happened, or "Are you okay?" He knew what had happened. He knew I wasn't okay. His job wasn't to ask questions. It was to act. "It's cold," I murmured, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. It was the only thing I could think to say, an absurd obviousness. He nodded, a minimal inclination of his head. His gray eyes didn't leave mine. I saw in them absolute professionalism, but also, very deep down, a flash of something more. Respect, a shadow of contained indignation. It wasn't compassion, not exactly. It was the recognition of a pact fulfilled, of a line that had been crossed. "Yes, ma'am," he responded, with that calm voice that seemed to muffle the sound of the storm. "But it's over now. Now comes the warmth." He extended a hand, not to help me up, but with his palm up, an offer, In it there was no condescension, but a promise of security. It was a hand that knew what it was doing. And then, just as I was about to move my trembling hand to take his eyes diverted for the first time from mine. They went down to my neck, to the small pendant I always wore, a modest silver chain with a charm that I had managed to hide from my children's greed, who only saw value in the big and ostentatious. It was a small silver figure, simple, worn by time, a stork with wings half open. His eyes, those gray and impassive eyes, opened wide. The professionalism completely shattered, replaced by a shock so deep, so visceral, that it seemed to stop the very air he breathed. His jaw tensed. The color drained from his weathered face. His voice for the first time, faltered. It was barely a hoarse whisper, charged with an emotion he couldn't contain. Where did you get that? I looked at him, confused. The pain, the cold, the surprise of his reaction left me speechless. My pendant. Why? He reached out his hand, not to take mine, but to touch, with trembling incredulity, the small silver stork. His fingers, large and strong, brushed the metal with a delicacy I didn't think him capable of. And then he raised his gaze to mine. He no longer saw me as a client, as the diamond lady. He looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost. His breathing became labored. "Mother," he said, and the word sounded like a moan, charged with an emotion so raw, so devastating, that it broke his voice. "My God, Isabella." And the world, my already shattered world, broke into pieces once more. He knew my name, my real name. And he had called that pendant the stork, he had said. No, it couldn't be. My eyes met his, those gray eyes that now swam in a sea of memories and pain as old as mine. And in their depth I saw reflected not the old woman abandoned in the mud, but a young woman from another life, another time. And I knew, with a certainty that pierced my soul more deeply than any knife, that the man kneeling before me, my bodyguard, my salvation, was the son I thought I had lost forever. The word hung in the cold air, as tangible as the snowflakes settling on his shoulders and my face. Mother. He had said it, and not as a title, but as recognition, as a fact torn from the deepest part of his being. I could only look at him. The pain in my hip, the cold that penetrated my bones, everything vanished before the earthquake those 2 syllables had caused in my reality. My lips moved, but no sound came out. What could I say? What question to ask first in the middle of that absurdity? He remained kneeling in the mud. His hand, which moments before was an offer of professional security, now trembled slightly, while his fingers still caressed the silver stork. His breathing was visible in the cold air, labored, nothing like the stone calm he showed before. "You," I managed to stammer, my voice the creak of frost. "What did you say?" He blinked, as if coming out of a trance. The shock in his gray eyes began to be forcibly contained, cornered by an iron discipline that seemed to be the core of his being. He withdrew his hand, as if the silver had burned him. "Excuse me," he murmured, and his voice recovered part of its previous gravity, but now it had a crack, a barely perceptible vibration. "I saw the pendant. It surprised me. Sorry." He was denying the obvious. What he had said hadn't been a casual exclamation. It had been a cry from the soul. "No," I said, with more strength than I thought I had. I leaned on an elbow, despite the stab of pain, to be closer to his face. "You said mother. You said Isabella. No one has called me that for 40 years. My name from my mouth seemed to physically impact him. He closed his eyes for a second, squeezing them tightly, as if trying to erase a painful image. When he opened them, the professionalism had returned, but it was a thin layer, a cracked mask over a volcano of emotions. "Ma'am, you're injured and hypothermic," he said, his tone now practical, urgent. "We need to get you out of here immediately. Allow me." This time, his hand didn't extend as an offer, but moved with decision. He unbuttoned his heavy black jacket, and with a softness that belied his robust build, placed it over my shoulders. The residual heat from his body was a shock as intense as the cold, almost painful. It smelled clean, of neutral soap and something more, of man, of contained sweat, of reality. "Don't ignore me," I pleaded, clinging to the lapel of the jacket with my numb fingers. "Who are you?" "Your bodyguard," he replied, avoiding my gaze. He positioned himself sideways and with a fluid and efficient movement slid one arm under my shoulders and another under my knees. Hold on. Before I could protest, he lifted me. The world spun, and a nauseating dizziness ran through me. A moan of pain escaped my lips as my hip moved. He felt it and adjusted his grip to hold me even more firmly, but with exquisite caution. I weighed nothing in his arms. He was solid as an oak, immutable. My head rested against his chest, and I could feel the accelerated beating of his heart, a furious drum that contrasted brutally with the apparent calm of his face. He walked toward the van. His boots didn't slip in the mud. He opened the rear door with one hand, revealing a surprisingly tidy and cozy interior. It wasn't the luxurious leather upholstery of my children's BMW, but wide seats covered with resistant, dark fabric. There was a thick mesh folded with military precision in a corner, a metal first aid kit attached to the wall, and a large thermos secured with a strap. He deposited me carefully on the seat. The plush of the seat was cold to the touch, but after the mud, it was heaven. He leaned in, his face only centimeters from mine, and quickly checked my pupils with a small flashlight he took from a pocket. His breath formed small clouds in the air between us. "Do you have pain in your neck? In your back?" he asked, his voice now clinical. But his eyes, those gray eyes, couldn't help but wander to the pendant that still rested on my chest. "Only my hip," I murmured, "and my heart hurts." The phrase hit him. He blinked rapidly and straightened, breaking the proximity. "I'm going to drive. We need to warm you slowly," he said, almost to himself. He closed the door and I was left in semi-darkness, wrapped in the warmth of his jacket, trembling not only from cold but from overwhelming confusion. He started the van. The engine purred with contained power. Heat began to come out of the ventilation ducts, dry and blessed air that enveloped my frozen feet. We set in motion, the vehicle rocking gently, taking me away from that nightmare place. Through the glass that separated the rear compartment from the front, I saw his neck, his short, dark hair, the rigidity of his shoulders. Who was this man? The son I lost? Was it possible? Logic rebelled. It was madness. A feverish dream induced by shock and pain. But that pendant, the stork, only one person in the world could have recognized it that way. I closed my eyes, and the past, the one I had sealed under lock and key and buried in the deepest part of my soul, burst forth with the force of a broken dam. 42 years ago, the provincial hospital, white, cold, impersonal. Me, barely 20 years old, terrified, holding my baby in my arms for the first and last time. I cried silently, my tears falling on the blue blanket that wrapped him. He had gray eyes, large, that looked at me with preternatural calm. I hung around his neck, with trembling hands, the small silver stork, a symbol of what should have been, a new beginning, the delivery of a son to his mother, but it was a goodbye, a forced delivery. "It's for the best, Isabella," they told me. "For him and for you. You can't raise him alone." They took him from my arms. The emptiness, the mute, absolute pain, the promise to never look back. The stork went with him, my son, my first son, whom I called, in the silence of my heart, Lucas. A sob escaped my throat, muffled by the noise of the engine. The man at the wheel visibly tensed, his knuckles gripping the steering wheel were white. "Ma'am," he asked, his voice coming through a small intercom I hadn't noticed. "Do you need anything? More heat?" "What's your name?" I asked. Without opening my eyes, my voice barely a thread of sound. There was a long, charged pause, only the hum of the engine. "It doesn't matter," he finally responded, with a hoarse voice. "I'm just your bodyguard." A bodyguard who knew my name, my real name, I insisted, opening my eyes and looking at his neck, and who recognizes a pendant I haven't seen since I put it on my son, more than 40 years ago, the day they took him from me. The vehicle braked slightly, almost imperceptibly, before recovering constant speed. He didn't respond. His silence was more eloquent than any word. "It was at the provincial hospital," I continued, speaking more to myself than to him, letting the poisoned memories flow. "A gray day like this one. He had gray eyes, like yours. He looked at me, and didn't cry, as if he understood everything. Stop. The word came from him like a whip, cutting, charged with such fierce anguish that it made me silent immediately. Don't speak. Rest. Why? I whispered. Do you fear hearing it? Do you fear remembering? He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see his profile outlined against the afternoon light filtering through the windshield. His jaw was clenched to the point of fracture. I fear that shock is making you say things you'll later regret, he said, each word measured, forced. My job is to protect you, not stir up the past. And who hired you? I asked, clinging to that thread. Years ago, I paid for this service. Through what company? Who are you? A discreet security firm, he replied evasively. Nothing more. You're lying, I said. And I noticed how a spark of my old character, the one that had allowed me to survive and prosper alone, was reborn from the ashes of my pain. You reacted to the pendant. You said, "Mother, is it you? Are you my Lucas?" The name, spoken aloud, resonated inside the van like thunder. He pressed the brake harder this time, and the vehicle stopped completely at the side of the rural road. He turned off the engine. The silence was sudden and absolute. He turned completely in his seat. Through the dividing grid, our eyes met. His no longer hid anything. Pain, rage, confusion, and a sadness as old as time flooded everything. Why? He asked, and his voice was rough, broken by raw emotion. Why now? Why after a lifetime of silence? My heart stopped. It wasn't a confirmation, but it wasn't a denial either. It was a cry of pain. So it's true? I gasped, unable to contain the tears that now flowed hot down my cheeks. Is it you? He didn't respond directly. His gaze was intense, scrutinizing, searching in my face for the answers that fate had denied him. They left me on the steps of an orphanage, he said, each word coming out as if it cost him superhuman effort. With a blue blanket and this, he gestured with a head movement toward my neck. Nothing more. No note. No name. I didn't abandon you. I screamed, the pain and guilt of 4 decades exploding in a torrent of words. They took him from me. They told me it wasn't right to raise you alone, that they would give you a better life. I signed some papers. I was scared. I was a child. I thought it was best for you. He observed me, his face a mask of conflict. He didn't seem moved by my explosion, only tired, terribly tired. A better life, he repeated, with a bitter hint of irony. 12 foster homes, 6 orphanages, the street, the army. This, he made a vague gesture encompassing the van, his life. Do you think this is better? Each word was a hammer blow to my conscience. I had lived with the pain of loss, but also with the comfort of a lie, that he would be fine, happy somewhere. Hearing the harsh reality of his life was 1,000 times worse than any abandonment on the road. I'm sorry, I cried, sinking into the seat, ashamed, destroyed. I'm sorry, Lucas. Please, forgive me. I didn't know. Don't call me Lucas, he cut, his voice recovering part of its initial hardness. My name is Cale. It has been for a long time. Cale, a hard, cutting name, nothing like the sweet name I chose for him. And how, I swallowed, trying to order my thoughts. How did you end up here? How did you know about me? He sighed, a deep and tired sound. He started the engine again and resumed the march as if he needed the movement to be able to speak. A few years ago, he began, his voice more controlled, but still tense. I worked for a security firm that handled high-profile clients. They assigned me a due diligence file for a possible investment. The client's name was Isabella Ricolmi, widow of Soulless, owner of a sold jewelry store, with considerable capital. It was an uncommon name. I started investigating by protocol, and the pieces started fitting. The city, the dates, my own history. I always carried the pendant with me. It was all I had. I knew it was an uncommon silver stork, handmade, and in one of the archive photos of the jewelry store, from decades ago, I saw her, in the display window, signed by the same artisan. I listened, hypnotized. He had found me. He had been investigating me, and I, without knowing it, had hired him, my own son, as my phantom bodyguard. When I knew it was you, I didn't know what to do, he confessed, and for the first time I heard genuine vulnerability in his voice. Contact you after so long. For what? To blame you? To ask for explanations? You had your life, your family, your other children. The bitter emphasis on other children didn't go unnoticed. He knew about David and Laura. So instead, he continued, I made sure my firm was the one you contracted when you called that emergency number they gave you at the time. I paid for the service myself. Under false identities, I became your shadow. To make sure that at least you were safe. From afar. It was all I could do. All my anger allowed me. The revelation left me breathless. He had been there, all the time, watching, protecting me in secret, feeding a rage that, now I understood, was more than justified. And today, I said, almost voiceless, today I received the alert. He finished, his tone becoming cold, professional again, as if he needed that armor not to break down. I located you, and I came. The rest, you know. We arrived at a small roadside motel, discreet, one of those that don't ask questions. He parked in a dark place, away from the streetlights. Where are we? I asked, looking at the faded facade. In a safe place, he said, getting out of the vehicle. Far away. I need to assess your injuries and decide the next step. Your children know you have this service. They might try to find out about it. Your children, David and Laura. The betrayal, the pain of what they had done to me, returned with all its force, mixing with the emotional tsunami of having found Lucas. He opened the rear door. He no longer avoided my gaze, but had reinstalled the barrier of professionalism. However, now I could see what was behind it. The pain of an abandoned child, the rage of a wounded man, and the confusion of someone whose world had also suddenly turned upside down. Can you walk? He asked, his voice neutral. I shook my head, not only because of the physical pain, but because of the emotional exhaustion that made me feel like lead. He nodded. He lifted me in his arms again. It was strange. Now I knew he was my son. I felt his warmth, his strength, the beat of his heart against my arm, and yet, he was a stranger. A man hardened by a life I couldn't imagine. He walked toward a ground-floor room, opened the door with a magnetic key, and entered. The room was Spartan but clean. A large bed, a small table, an old television. He left me gently on the bed. I'm going to get the first aid kit and secure the perimeter, he said, turning to leave. Kale, I called, using the name he chose. He stopped at the door but didn't turn around. Yes? Thank you, I whispered. For coming. He remained motionless for a moment. Then he nodded once, brusquely, and left, closing the door behind him. I was left alone in the silent room, the echo of his confession and the enormity of mine resonating in my ears. I had lost 2 children in one day. But I had found one who looked at me with the eyes of a stranger and bore the name of a soldier, one who had saved me, not for money, but for a debt of blood that he himself didn't seem to understand. And outside, in the cold night, was my son, my bodyguard, my Lucas, assessing the perimeter, protecting me from external threats. But the greatest threat, the one that could destroy us completely, was already inside these 4 walls. It was our past. It was the truth. And I didn't know if in the end, after everything, he would forgive me, or if his rage contained for 40 years would end up consuming us both. The door closed with a soft but definitive click. The sound left me isolated in a bubble of charged silence. The room smelled clean, of cheap bleach and old dust. The light from the bedside lamp, dim and yellowish, created dancing shadows on the bare walls. I settled on the bed, the springs creaking under my weight, and wrapped myself more in Cole's jacket. It still carried his warmth and his scent, a tangible reminder of the storm of emotions that had just exploded between us. Cale, not Lucas. Cale. The name was a slab, a wall. It represented all the years we didn't share, all the battles he fought alone, all the scars I couldn't kiss to heal. Every time I thought it, a stab of guilt, sharp and nauseating, twisted my stomach. How could I have believed that giving him up for adoption was the solution? I, who always prided myself on my strength, my determination, had yielded to the pressure of ashamed parents and a system that saw a 20-year-old single mother as an announced disaster. I believed them. I believed my own weakness. And he had paid the price. 12 homes, 6 orphanages, the street. The words resonated in my skull like funeral bells. I had lived in a comfortable lie, consoling myself with the idea that he was on a farm with a loving family, with siblings, going to school. My imaginary Lucas smiled, happy. My real Lucas, Cale, had hardened in the trenches of abandonment. A noise outside the room made me hold my breath. Firm steps, moving away, and then approaching. He was there, vigilant. His mere presence, now that I knew who he was, produced in me a mixture of overwhelming comfort and paralyzing anxiety. He had saved me. He protected me. But why? For a sense of professional duty? For a remnant of morbid curiosity? Or was there, buried under tons of rage, a thread of connection that even he couldn't deny? The door opened. He entered with the metal first aid kit in one hand and a glass of water in the other. His face was a mask of forced neutrality, but the tension around his eyes and the firmness of his mouth betrayed the internal battle. "I need to examine your hip," he said, placing the kit and water on the table. His voice was clinical, flat, that of a paramedic talking to a stranger. "It's okay," I murmured. He approached the bed. He avoided looking me in the eyes, concentrating on the task. He knelt beside the bed with the same efficiency with which he had done it in the mud. "I'm going to lift your skirt. Excuse the invasion," he said, and his fingers, expert and cold despite the heat of the room, took the edge of my dress. I nodded, unable to speak. His proximity was electrifying. I could see the small scars on his knuckles, the shadow of his beard, the pulse in his temple. This man, this soldier, was the fragile creature I once nursed. The contradiction made me dizzy. With utmost care, he lifted the fabric. The skin on my hip was bruised, a purplish and black stain that spread over my pale skin. His breathing caught for an instant. A flash of something concern, anger, crossed his gray eyes before he clouded them again with professionalism. "It doesn't seem broken, but it's very inflamed," he diagnosed, his fingers gently palpating the edges of the bruise. His touch was impersonal, but incredibly gentle. "You need ice and anti-inflammatories." "I have both." "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded, stood up, and went to the small refrigerator in the room. He took out an improvised ice pack, a package of frozen peas wrapped in a thin towel, and returned. He placed it precisely over the bruise. The cold made me gasp. "Bear it," he said, and for the first time his voice had a nuance that wasn't that of a bodyguard or wounded son, but of care. It was an order, but soft, almost familiar. While he held the ice, he opened the first aid kit. It was impressive. It wasn't the typical home kit full of band-aids and aspirin. It was full of compression bandages, tourniquets, sterile gauze packages, and several bottles of medications with generic labels. He took out a white pill from a blister pack. 600 milligrams ibuprofen, he said, handing it to me along with the glass of water, for inflammation and pain. I took it obediently. The water was cold and soothed my throat, dry from crying and tension. He watched me swallow it, then closed the first aid kit with a metallic click. He remained standing next to the bed, uncomfortable, as if he didn't know what to do with his body now that the medical task was finished. His eyes wandered around the room, over the faded beige curtains, over the generic painting of a boat on a calm sea, anywhere but at me. The silence stretched, heavy, uncomfortable. Only the distant hum of the refrigerator and the occasional crackle of the bag of peas on my skin broke the stillness. "Cale," I said, breaking the spell. He tensed, but finally looked at me. "Yes. What happened after?" I asked, my voice trembling. "After the orphanage. You said, the street, the army." His jaw tightened. He looked toward the door as if calculating exits. "It's not the time," he responded, evasive. "You should rest." "Please," I pleaded, and the pain in my voice was genuine. "I need to know, I need to understand what I did to you." The word understand seemed to resonate in him. His eyes met mine, and this time they didn't look away. There was a burning intensity in them. "Understand," he repeated, and a hint of bitter smile twisted his lips. "Do you think you can understand sleeping in doorways, stealing to eat, joining the army at 17, because it was the only way to have a roof and a hot meal? Killing for the first time in a desert that wasn't yours, for a flag that didn't feel yours. Each question was a blow. I shrank on the bed but didn't look away. I owed it to him. I had to hear every word, however painful. And the scars? I asked, looking at his hands. He lifted a hand, observing it as if seeing it for the first time. This one, he pointed to a thick white line running across his palm. Knife. I was 14. For a piece of bread. This one, another, on the back. Barbed wire, escaping from police after. Well, it doesn't matter. Do you want me to continue? Do you want to understand the sound a bone makes when it breaks? The taste of blood in your mouth? The emptiness of not mattering to anyone in the world? Stop! I screamed, covering my face with my hands, unable to bear more. Please, stop. He stopped. His breathing was agitated. He turned around and leaned his hands on the table, bowing his head as if the weight of his own memories was too much for his shoulders. That's what I thought, he murmured, his voice charged with infinite fatigue. No one wants to truly understand. They just want the sugar-coated version, the one that won't keep them awake at night. I'm sorry, I whimpered, my sobs muffled by my hands. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I heard him take a deep breath, counting to 10. When he turned around, his expression had changed. The rage had dissipated, leaving behind a sadness so deep it was almost worse. The army gave me structure, he said, his voice calmer, but empty. It taught me to shoot, to fight, to survive, and then to protect. I became that, a protector. It's the only thing I know how to do. It's ironic, isn't it? A dry laugh, without humor, escaped him. The abandoned son protecting the mother who abandoned him. I didn't. Yes, you did, he exploded again. But this time it was a cry of pain, not anger. You signed those damn papers. You left me there. You left me there. You went and had another life, a family, other children who did deserve your love. He approached the bed, and for the first time I saw tears shining in his eyes, though furiously contained. I saw them, he spat, his voice broken. David and Laura, investigating for your file. I saw the photos. Christmas, birthdays, beach vacations. You smiling, hugging them. Do you know what that does? Do you know what it feels like to see your mother, whom you only remember as a scent and a feeling of loss, laughing and hugging her, real children? The word real pierced me like a spear. For him, I had replaced him. I had moved on, happy, while he rotted in the system. They were never real to me, I screamed, sitting up suddenly in bed, ignoring the stabbing pain in my hip. Not like you. I never stopped thinking about you. Every day, Kale? Every damn day of my life. I kept your ultrasound, the only photo they let me take. I have it. I had it, in a little box next to my bed. I named you in my prayers every night, until faith ran out for me. They, David and Laura, never looked at me like you looked at me that day. With that calm, with that understanding. It was always take, and take. And I gave them everything, hoping in return for a crumb of the love I couldn't give to you. I stopped, gasping, tears running freely down my face. I was shouting at my son. We were destroying each other with the truth, with decades of accumulated pain. Cadiel looked at me, shocked. My explosion seemed to have disarmed him. His fury vanished, replaced by absolute confusion. Why? Why didn't you look for me? He asked, and his voice was now that of a child. The child he carried inside. Later, when you were older, when you had your jewelry store, your money, why didn't you come looking for me? The simplest question, the most painful. Out of fear, I confessed, defeated, sinking back into the pillow. Fear that you would hate me. Fear that you would look at me exactly like you're looking at me now. Fear of discovering that you had died. It was easier to live with the lie, with the hope that you were fine, than to face the possible reality that I had destroyed your life. I was a coward, Kale, a selfish coward. Admitting it aloud was like removing a tumor from my chest, painful, bloody, but liberating. He remained still, processing my words. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with the rawness of our mutual confession. He said finally, abruptly changing the subject, as if he needed to hold on to something concrete, the current crisis. Your children. Why? The money. I nodded, wiping tears with the back of my hand. Everything. His father's inheritance. My savings. I think they had debts. Many. Laura with gambling, David with, I don't know well, women, cars, appearances. I refused to give them more. I put conditions in the will. They wanted everything, now, today. Cadiel nodded slowly, his analytical mind taking control again, recomposing his armor. They're stupid, he murmured, with contempt. Abandoning you like that, leaving you alive, an unnecessary risk. If they wanted the money, a domestic accident would have been cleaner, fewer questions. The coldness with which he said it chilled my blood. He didn't just think it, he evaluated it from a tactical point of view. Are you saying that they should have killed me? I asked, horrified. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the abyss that separated our worlds. I'm saying they're amateurs motivated by greed, he corrected, his voice neutral again, and that makes them unpredictable and dangerous. Now they have control of your accounts, I assume. They have the papers, the forged signatures, yes, I confirmed. But not the passwords to the numbered accounts. Those are in the bank's safe. You need my physical presence, or my death certificate. A flash of professional interest shone in his eyes. Good. That gives us time. He ran a hand through his hair. We need a plan. You can't go back there. We need a lawyer, evidence. A plan? I repeated, stunned. Cale, I just found you. They left me on the road. How can I think about lawyers and plans? Because it's what needs to be done, he said, with a firmness that admitted no reply. Sentiment is a luxury we can't afford now. They won't stop. Now that they've crossed that line, they'll try to finish it. They have to get that death certificate one way or another. His words, harsh and pragmatic, had a terrifying sense. David and Laura were no longer my children. They were a threat. And Cale, my lost son, was my only protector. And what do we do? I asked, feeling small and frail again. First, you sleep, he ordered. I stay awake. I'll watch. In the morning, we'll move. I have a safer place. Can't you stay here? I pleaded, pointing to the chair at the table. I don't want to be alone. The request sounded childish. He hesitated. Conflicted, finally, he nodded. I'll stay, but you must sleep. I closed my eyes, exhausted physically and emotionally. I felt his presence a few meters away, a vigilant silhouette in the twilight. My son, my bodyguard, the child I abandoned, and the man who rescued me. Just as sleep was beginning to drag me, his voice emerged in the darkness, low, almost inaudible. The ultrasound. Did you really keep it? I opened my eyes. He wasn't looking at me. He was facing away, looking through a crack in the curtains toward the dark parking lot. Yes, I whispered. In a music box, next to my bed. He made a small nod of his head, a minimal gesture of acceptance. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was just a fact, a small piece of data in the file of our shattered life. But it was something, a thread, as thin as a spider's, but something. And outside, in the cold night, I knew Cale continued watching, protecting me from the monsters I myself had helped create. And I wondered, with a terror that froze my soul, if in the end the monster from which he would most have to protect me would be from the ocean of rage and pain that my own son carried inside.